power. It's a word that echoes through history, whispered in boardrooms, and debated in the halls of government. But what if I told you that while we're busy watching politicians and celebrities, the real power lies elsewhere, hidden in plain sight, passed down through generations, like a carefully guarded secret. Throughout human history, power has never been evenly distributed. From ancient tribal chiefs to modern political elites, it has always concentrated in the hands of the few. But some families have taken this to an entirely different level, building empires that span continents, influence economies, and shape the very fabric of our global society today. We're pulling back the curtain on the dynasties that truly run the world. These aren't just wealthy families, they're institutions unto themselves, with influence that reaches into your daily life in ways you've never imagined. Some of their names you'll recognize immediately. Others have worked hard to stay out of the spotlight. But all of them share one thing in common: power that transcends borders, generations, and even governments. This is the story of the most powerful families who secretly run the world. Let's begin. There's one name that dominates conspiracy theories, financial history, and conversations about global power. It's Rothschild. But separating fact from fiction when it comes to this family is like trying to untangle a web that's been woven over 2.5 centuries. The Rothschild story begins in the Frankfurt ghetto in the late 1700s. Meyer Amschel Rothschild started as a humble apprentice at a small banking house in Hamburg. But this was no ordinary young man. Meyer possessed an almost supernatural understanding of finance, currencies, and the intricate dance of international commerce. By his 20s, he had established himself as a dealer in rare coins and financial instruments, catching the attention of European nobility. But here's where the story gets interesting. Meyer didn't just build a banking empire, he engineered a strategy that had never been attempted before. He had 5 sons, and he stationed each one in a different European financial capital. Amschel in Frankfurt, Salomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Carl in Naples, and James in Paris. Imagine that, a family literally positioning themselves at every major hub of European power simultaneously. This wasn't just smart business, it was revolutionary. The Rothschilds created the world's first truly international banking network. They could move money across borders faster than any government. They had information before kings and queens did. In fact, when Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo in 1815, Nathan Rothschild knew about it a full 24 hours before the British government received official word. Think about that for a moment. A private citizen had better intelligence than the most powerful empire on earth. How did he use this information? According to legend, Nathan made a fortune on the London Stock Exchange by buying British government bonds when everyone else thought Britain had lost the war. Whether this story is completely accurate or embellished, it doesn't matter. It demonstrates the kind of power and reach the Rothschilds possessed. As Europe industrialized and nations needed massive loans for railways, factories, and yes, wars, the Rothschilds were there with open coffers. They lent England approximately $10 billion in today's money to fight Napoleon. They financed the Suez Canal. They bankrolled mining operations in Africa and South America. Their wealth became so vast that they effectively operated as a private central bank for multiple nations. Now, this is where things get complicated. The Rothschilds have been blamed for almost every major catastrophe in modern history. Assassinating presidents, check. Starting wars for profit, check. Controlling world governments through debt, check. Some even claim they're part of secret societies working with extraterrestrials, though we can probably file that one under extremely unlikely. The truth is more nuanced. Yes, the Rothschilds wielded enormous power. Yes, they profited from wars and economic upheaval. But they also helped stabilize currencies, prevented several economic collapses, and have been among the world's most generous philanthropists. The family has donated billions to arts, sciences, and humanitarian causes. They've built hospitals, funded research, and preserved countless cultural treasures. Today, the Rothschild fortune is estimated between $350 to $400 billion, though the family's true wealth is nearly impossible to calculate because it's dispersed across so many holdings, trusts, and investments. They may not control the world, but they certainly influence it more than most governments. The Rothschilds represent old world power. The Rockefellers are the American dream turned into a dynasty with all the ambition, ruthlessness, and influence that entails. John D. Rockefeller was born in 1839 in rural New York to a snake oil salesman, father, and a deeply religious mother. Young John combined his father's business instincts with his mother's discipline, creating a personality that was methodical, calculating, and absolutely relentless in the pursuit of success. At 17, Rockefeller became a bookkeeper. He loved it. While other young men dreamed of adventure, John delighted in balancing ledgers and finding efficiencies. But he wasn't content to count other people's money. He wanted to make his own fortune. The timing couldn't have been better. In 1859, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, and suddenly everyone was drilling holes in the ground, trying to strike it rich. But Rockefeller saw what others missed. Drilling oil was only half the equation. Someone needed to refine it, transport it, and distribute it. And that's where the real money was. In 1870, Rockefeller founded Standard Oil. What followed was one of the most aggressive business campaigns in American history. Rockefeller didn't just compete, annihilated competition. He bought out rivals. He negotiated secret deals with railroads to get lower shipping rates while raising costs for competitors. He undercut prices until competitors went bankrupt, then bought their assets for pennies. On the dollar dot by 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refineries and pipelines. 90%. Rockefeller had created a monopoly so complete that the U.S. government had to invent new laws to break it up. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and subsequent legal action in 1911 finally forced Standard Oil to split into 34 separate companies. But here's the twist. Rockefeller still owned shares in all of them. The breakup actually made him richer. When he died in 1937, his wealth was equivalent to $340 billion today, making him arguably the richest American in history. That's 4 times what Bill Gates is worth. The Rockefeller influence didn't end with John D. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., transformed the family from robber barons into philanthropists and power brokers. He donated land for the United Nations headquarters in New York. He funded medical research that led to treatments for yellow fever and hookworm. He established the Rockefeller Foundation, which has invested billions in public health, education, and science worldwide. But it's Nelson Rockefeller, John D's grandson, who really showed the family's political reach. He served as governor of New York for 15 years, and then as vice president of the United States under Gerald Ford. The Rockefellers didn't just have wealth, they had political legitimacy and power at the highest levels. Today, the family fortune has dispersed considerably, estimated at around $11 billion, spread across hundreds of descendants. But the Rockefeller name still opens doors that remain closed to almost everyone else. Their foundations influence global health policy, environmental initiatives, and educational systems around the world. Some critics argue that this kind of philanthropic power is just another form of control, allowing a single family to shape societies' priorities based on their values rather than democratic processes. Whether you see them as generous benefactors or oligarchs with good PR depends on your perspective. Why, if you've ever wondered who really controls America's money, the Morgan family should be at the top of your list. This is a story about how one man became so powerful that he could single-handedly save or destroy the United States economy. John Pierpont Morgan, better known as J.P. Morgan, was born in 1837 to a banking family. Unlike Rockefeller, who built his empire from scratch, J.P. started with advantages. But what he did with those advantages changed the financial landscape of America forever. The year 1893 was a crisis point for the United States. The country was hemorrhaging gold to foreign investors, and the Treasury was nearly depleted. The US dollar was on the verge of collapse. The government was paralyzed. Banks were failing. Panic was spreading. Enter J.P. Morgan. He assembled a syndicate of bankers, including the Rothschilds, and executed one of the most audacious financial rescues in history. Using U.S. bonds, Morgan bought back gold from European investors, restoring confidence in the dollar and stabilizing the economy. The crisis was averted, but there was a catch. This gold and bond exchange effectively put Morgan in control of the U.S. gold supply. At a time when the dollar's value was tied to gold, controlling the gold meant controlling the economy. Morgan could influence the value of currency, raise or lower consumer prices, and determine which industries thrived or failed. He used this power to finance and consolidate massive industries. He created U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation, by buying out Andrew Carnegie and combining dozens of steel companies. He backed the creation of General Electric, giving him control over the nation's emerging electrical infrastructure. He restructured railroads, reorganized banks, and had his hands in virtually every major industry. Morgan's methods were ruthless. He slashed jobs, reduced wages, and eliminated workplace safety measures, safety that cut into profit margins. Workers were disposable. If someone died in a factory accident, there were 10 more desperate for work the next day. This was the dark heart of the Gilded Age, where robber barons built fortunes on the backs of exploited workers. The Panic of 1907 demonstrated Morgan's power even more dramatically. When a financial crisis threatened to destroy the American banking system, it wasn't the government that stepped in, it was J.P. Morgan. He locked New York's top bankers in his library and wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to pool their resources to save failing institutions. He personally decided which banks would survive and which would fail. One man was acting as the central bank of the United States. This crisis led to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, partly to ensure that no single private citizen would ever again have that much power over the American economy. But by then, the Morgan Empire was so entrenched that the family's influence continued unabated. Today, J.P. Morgan Chase is one of the largest banks in the world, with assets exceeding $3.7 trillion. That's larger than the GDP of most countries. The bank has been fined billions for various violations, from manipulating energy markets to predatory lending practices that contributed to the 2008 financial crisis. Critics argue that the Morgan financial empire represents everything wrong with modern capitalism: too big to fail, too powerful to regulate effectively, and too interconnected with government to ever truly be held accountable. The revolving door between J.P. Morgan and the U.S. Treasury Department is well documented, with former bank executives regularly taking positions in government and vice versa. Whether you see this as necessary expertise being applied to public service, or as the ultimate conflict of interest, depends on your worldview. But there's no denying that the Morgan name continues to wield enormous influence over the global financial system. Here's a family that literally built their fortune on explosions, chemicals, and keeping secrets that could change the world. The DuPont family story is uniquely American and uniquely terrifying in its scope. Thor Irene DuPont de Nemours fled France during the French Revolution and arrived in America in 1800. He noticed that American gunpowder was expensive and poor quality. Having trained under the famous chemist Antoine Lavoisier, DuPont knew he could do better. He established a gunpowder mill on the Brandywine River in Delaware, and business exploded. Literally, the DuPont company became the largest supplier of gunpowder to the U.S. military. During the War of 1812, the Civil War, and America's westward expansion, DuPont gunpowder was there. They diversified into dynamite and other explosives, becoming the backbone of America's industrial and military expansion. Like Standard Oil and other monopolies, DuPont was broken up under antitrust laws in 1912. But also, like those other companies, the family maintained dominant market share. During World War I, DuPont supplied nearly 40% of all munitions used by Allied forces. The family's wealth grew exponentially during the war, leading to accusations of war profiteering. But here's where the DuPont story takes a fascinating turn. During World War II, when the U.S. government needed to produce plutonium for the Manhattan Project, they turned to DuPont. The company designed and built the massive Hanford site in Washington state, one of the primary facilities for producing the plutonium used in the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. DuPont operated this facility at cost, taking only a symbolic $1 profit. This wasn't altruism, it was patriotism and public relations. After being accused of war profiteering in WWI, the company wanted to demonstrate they could put country before profit. After the Soviets developed their own atomic bomb in 1949, DuPont again worked closely with the U.S. government to develop the hydrogen bomb, helping America maintain its nuclear advantage during the Cold War. But the DuPont empire expanded far beyond explosives and nuclear weapons. The company became a chemical industry giant, creating innovations like nylon, Teflon, Kevlar, and countless other materials that revolutionized modern life. They also created chemicals like CFCs and PFAs, substances that have caused enormous environmental damage. The most controversial DuPont conspiracy theory involves marijuana prohibition. In the 1930s, as DuPont was developing synthetic fibers like nylon, hemp was emerging as a competitive natural fiber. Some historians argue that DuPont, along with newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst and other industrialists, lobbied for marijuana prohibition to eliminate hemp as a commercial competitor. The evidence for this is circumstantial but compelling. DuPont had patents for processes using wood pulp for paper production, which would have been threatened by cheaper hemp paper. Andrew Mellon, the Treasury Secretary, who appointed the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, was DuPont's primary banker and had invested heavily in the company's new synthetic fiber ventures. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act effectively banned hemp cultivation. Whether DuPont orchestrated this or simply benefited from it remains debated, but it's undeniable that the prohibition removed a significant competitor to their products today. DuPont, now operating as multiple entities after various mergers and splits, remains a chemical industry powerhouse. The family's personal wealth is estimated at over $14 billion, and their corporate influence touches everything from agriculture to aerospace. But the DuPont legacy also includes some of the worst environmental disasters in American history. The company's contamination of drinking water with PFAS chemicals has affected millions of people. These forever chemicals are now found in the blood of virtually every American. Lawsuits have cost the company billions, but critics argue that's a small price compared to the long-term health consequences. The DuPont story illustrates a troubling reality. The families that wield the most power often do so in ways that are invisible to the average person. We don't think about who manufactures the chemicals in our water, our clothing, or our food packaging. But companies like DuPont have shaped the very chemical composition of modern life, often prioritizing profit over safety. Now we come to the family that most directly translates wealth into political power, the Bush dynasty. This is the story of how one family managed to place two presidents in the White House and influence American foreign policy for nearly a century. The Bush family's rise to power begins with Prescott Sheldon Bush, a Wall Street banker and U.S. Senator. In 2003, declassified documents revealed that Prescott had financial dealings with companies that did business with Nazi Germany. Even after the U.S. entered World War II, his company, Brown Brothers Harriman, acted as a U.S. base for the Thyssen Empire, which helped finance Hitler's rise to power. These weren't small transactions. The U.S. government seized several companies Prescott Bush was connected to under the Trading with the Enemy Act. One of these companies, the Silesian American Corporation, was accused of using forced labor from Auschwitz concentration camp. Prescott Bush maintained he didn't know about these connections until they were exposed. After the revelation in 1943, he distanced himself from these investments and helped raise funds for war victims. Whether he was truly ignorant or simply caught is still debated by historians. Despite this controversy, or perhaps because it was largely kept quiet at the time, Prescott Bush went on to become a U.S. Senator from Connecticut, where he served from 1952 to 1963. He was known as a moderate Republican, opposing McCarthyism and supporting civil rights legislation. His political connections and Wall Street wealth set the stage for his son's career. George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., followed a different path to power than his father. He served as a naval aviator in World War II, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross. After the war, he moved to Texas and made his fortune in the oil industry. But it was clear from early on that his sights were set on politics. Bush Sr.'s career is a masterclass in accumulating power. U.S. Congressman, Ambassador to the United Nations, Chairman of the Republican National Committee, Chief of the U.S. Liaison Office in China, Director of the CIA, Vice President under Reagan, and finally, President of the United States from 1989 to 1993. As CIA Director, Bush had access to intelligence networks and classified operations that gave him unique insights into global power dynamics. As president, he oversaw the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the First Gulf War against Iraq. Critics have long accused Bush Sr. of war profiteering, pointing to his family's oil interests and connections to defense contractors. However, historical evidence suggests Bush was actually reluctant to start the Gulf War. It was persistent pressure from British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and his own advisors that finally convinced him to respond to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Then came George W. Bush, the first president's son to follow his father into office since John Quincy Adams in 1825. Bush Jr.'s presidency was defined by the September 11 attacks and the subsequent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The accusations of war profiteering intensified during George W. Bush's presidency. His vice president, Dick Cheney, was former CEO of Halliburton, a company that received billions in no-bid contracts for Iraq reconstruction. The Bush administration's connections to oil companies and defense contractors raised questions about whether the Iraq War was driven by national security concerns or by corporate interests. The weapons of mass destruction that were cited as justification for invading Iraq were never found. Years later, even Bush administration officials admitted that the intelligence was flawed or manipulated. The war cost trillions of dollars, killed hundreds of thousands of people, and destabilized an entire region, with much of the financial benefit flowing to American corporations with ties to the Bush administration. But the Bush family's power extends beyond presidencies. Jeb Bush served as governor of Florida. Neil Bush and Marvin Bush have held positions on corporate boards and in financial institutions. The family network includes connections to the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest private equity firms, which invests heavily in defense and aerospace companies. The Bush dynasty represents the convergence of political power, corporate wealth, and intelligence community connections. They've leveraged family name recognition, political networks, and vast resources to maintain influence across generations. Today, the Bush family's political power has waned somewhat, but their influence remains. George W. Bush may be retired from politics, but the foreign policy decisions made during his presidency continue to shape global affairs. The family's estimated wealth of over $400 million ensures they remain players in political and business circles. Section 6. Honorable Mentions and Modern POWR. Before we conclude, we should mention several other families whose power rivals or exceeds those we've discussed. The the Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune, collectively hold more wealth than 40% of Americans combined. Over $250 billion. They control a retail empire that employs millions and influences everything from manufacturing in China to local economies in small-town America. The Koch family built an industrial conglomerate worth over $100 billion, spanning oil, refining, chemicals, fertilizers, and more. But their real power lies in political influence through think tanks, political action committees, and lobbying efforts. The Koch network has shaped American politics, environmental policy, and economic regulation. The Murdoch family controls a media empire that includes Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, and hundreds of other outlets reaching billions of people worldwide. The ability to shape public opinion and set political agendas may be more powerful than any amount of wealth. The Saudi royal family, with an estimated wealth of $1.4 trillion, controls one of the world's largest oil reserves. They've used this wealth to influence global energy markets, fund religious schools promoting their interpretation of Islam, and purchase political influence worldwide. And we must mention the new tech oligarchs, families like the Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg dynasties, who are building power through control of digital infrastructure, data, and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and space exploration. Their influence is still being written, but it may ultimately exceed all previous dynasties. So, do these families really run the world? The truth is complicated. No single family controls everything. The world is too complex, too interconnected for that. But these dynasties and others like them wield disproportionate influence over our economies, our governments, and our daily lives. They shape the laws we live under, the jobs we work, the products we buy, and even the information we receive. The concentration of power in family dynasties raises fundamental questions about democracy and fairness. Should a family's wealth and influence carry across generations? Is inherited power compatible with the ideal of equal opportunity? And when private dynasties become more powerful than elected governments, who really holds democratic leaders accountable? Throughout history, societies have grappled with these questions. Some have attempted to redistribute wealth through taxation around obstacles and reconcentrate. Understanding these dynasties isn't about conspiracy theories or paranoia. It's about recognizing how power actually operates in our world. It's about seeing beyond the democratic theater of elections and recognizing the deeper structures that shape our society. These families didn't achieve their power through accident. They were strategic, ruthless when necessary, and willing to play the long game across generations. Some used their power for genuine good. Others pursued profit regardless of human cost. Most did both. The question isn't whether powerful families exist. They clearly do. The question is, what do we do about it? How do we create systems that prevent excessive concentration of power while still rewarding innovation and entrepreneurship? How do we ensure that democracy isn't just a word, but a lived reality where power flows from the people rather than from inherited wealth? Those are questions each generation must answer for themselves. But you can't find answers until you first understand the reality of who holds power and how they use it. Thanks for watching. Remember to think critically, question power, and never assume that what you see on the surface is the whole story. The real power is always hiding just beneath. If you want to uncover more stories like this, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned.